we can start with the Q&A. Thank you so much for this. Those videos moved me so many times, but I managed not to cry. I'm very happy. I'm very proud of myself.
Hi, I'm Ariel from Singapore. Thanks for sharing. Well, I'm curious about in your works, they often involve the public, and has any of your work been misunderstood in any way? And has the context changed as some of your performance or projects have been situated or presented in different locations? And how do you work with that? Like, what kind of mindset? Perhaps you can share a little more about that experience.
Yeah, that's a great that's a great question, because yes, I really am interested in the time and the context. I will say what was interesting with Shuhaida, the audio guide, which when we actually did it in Lebanon, and we ended up having a panel and a talk after that was filled with art historians and archaeologists and art professionals basically, and many of them were horrified. Why are you giving people in the public who don't, the baker and the da da da, what are you giving them authority? And like, is this not just fake facts and fake, like whatever? Isn't it just sound bites? I say this in a way that what's funny about that, like, and so we ended up in this conversation, like, because I think one of the situations, like in museums, for example, is we're always talking down to people. You go into the museum, the education department, is the talks to you about things, and there's always like giving information to people. And we were reversing this here. We were actually allowing people to get really close to the objects and kind of be part of the object, since these objects are, you know, part of the country they come from and part of their land, But yeah, it was very contentious, which is really funny. And the part of that that's funny is now, several years later, because that was in 2018, it's kind of gelled into something completely different, which, we had this, peer-reviewed journal that wrote about it. We have this possibility that's going, all of a sudden it's become something kind of different, because partly also because I think there's also this kind of thing. We were willfully making it in Arabic, which seems completely unacceptable, like I was saying, in the art world, because like you want it to be understood by people who are educated. And, in Lebanon, there are very few people who only speak Arabic. It's a class thing, and so we were there. I was actually trying, and with a lot of the work, I'm really trying to think about like who owns the discourse, I'm interested, evidently, like with Fortune as well, is like what is this art world, and I mean, this is, I think, why Raffaella and I also kind of connected on this, like who has the right to talk about art, and how does art fit into the lives of people who don't have, that language? Like, who is it for? What is yours, what is mine? Also, so yeah, that's an interesting question. Thank you. I can't quite think of another thing, but I'm sure there is something else that um,
Well, I used to work in a museum in Singapore, so that work really kind of triggered me a little, the professional
really.
side of me. But at the same time, I think it's a really brave project to pass on that authority to the public to interpret it themselves. But I think during the COVID 2019, 2020, a lot of museums also kind of like, I'm quite glad they shifted that narrative towards the public instead. Asking them how do they feel about the objects rather than telling people what this object is about. So that to me, I think is very meaningful, or more meaningful. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, what part of doing it, like when I did it, for me, and this is, it was the first art project I did in Lebanon. I spent the first 18 years of my life in Lebanon, and my parents never left. So even though I came to America, I went back all the time. And I could not bring myself to show art there. Because for me, you know, I had really lived in the middle of the Civil War. And so for me, there was just something about, I don't know, you know, I never felt comfortable with it. So going back and doing this project was really interesting because I was able to think about it as making something that had to actually do with the streets and the people. Um, and there is a part of it, I think, that's interesting with respect to the museum aspect of it, and you know what a lot of the professionals felt, in which I understand you having that feeling, is that we were not, you know, at the very beginning, we said people came to the museum and they spoke to and for and about the objects. They didn't lie and they didn't try to tell the truth because there were no lies in this. This was not fake. This was groups of people who didn't know each other, who never felt that they had any right to speak at all about things like this, speaking together and breaking down barriers even between them and between the objects. So really, for me, a large part of what we were doing were the workshops in which we created this, and the sense of being together, and the residue of experience that's left in the museum now. You know, it's really much less about what the content is, and it's more about the sense of being together, you know? So, yeah.
So the question is, what was the biggest worry people shared with you?
Yeah. Well, I'll say a couple of things. Even though the people are anonymous, there are some things people shared that would break my heart to even say it. But what was interesting, like I was saying, is at the very beginning, the very first one, it was will we survive this? You know, what will happen? It was really the most common question at the very beginning was, what the fuck is happening? Sorry for it was really that. I mean, we have that over and over again, I think, across the world right now. We definitely have that in America right now. But it was that kind of sense of real, like, not knowing how to handle it. And I say this from somebody who grew up in a war, because I was 9 when the war started. So I had a normal life, and then the war started. So what happens eventually after a while is you become this person who's very accustomed to certain kinds of language. So what I would say that happened as I did the project over, as I did it the second time and the third time, the things people started to send me were very, very intimate, you know, about their family, parents about their children, guilt, uh, things that were very, very hard to handle, and sometimes very hard for me. And then I was really assessing, what does it mean to take on someone else's worry? And on top of that, you know, I'm trying to deal with life in a kind of more Buddhist way. I'm not quite sure that worry is something that we should be doing, because it's like projecting, you know, fear that. But what I decided that it was carrying something for somebody else. So I didn't really take this thing and take it emotionally into my heart, because one, it's not my responsibility, and two, what's the use of two people worrying about something? But what I did feel like I was doing was like I was holding it in my hand for them for a little while. And that's where I had the worry beads in my hands while I was walking. And I really kind of thought about them as like just us touching each other in a chain, you know, hitting against each other lightly, for a minute. But yeah, there were some very, very tough ones.
Thank you. John, hi, thanks for joining.
Oh, hi. Yeah, no, thanks for that talk. That's really it's really great. I was curious about sort of how you prepared your participants for their museum experience, and for them to feel comfortable sort of talking about the work and from the work. What was sort of your process when working with them before you even entered the museum?
Um, so like with most of my projects, I don't prepare people. I consider most of what I do as a kind of performance. So what we did do was, we would bring people. So we went to NGOs, we went to organizations, we invited people to bring to either send people from their organization or to show up on such and such a date, and we told them we're doing a project. And then when they would arrive, it was like I said, it would be small groups, but they were not necessarily from the same kind of, there would be people from different organizations, different walks of life. And eventually, to be completely honest, the guard on the steps of the museum started walking down into the street and asking people if they want to come up. So eventually, we literally were having people walking by the museum. Of course, the guard had a gun. And we were laughing about this because he was very sweet and everything, but he was just saying, hey, come in, something's happening, come in, something's happening. One of the reasons people showed up is because they'd heard that this was maybe, many didn't know that they could go in there. Many didn't know that it was actually for them. So part of the way that we invited it was we'd said, this is this, this space, it's for you, and I began sometimes. So one of the things that I did do is the museum has a lot of sarcophagi that are outside the museum in the garden, and people use them to throw garbage. So I sometimes would begin there because the other thing, I grew up with the sarcophagus that my mother planted geraniums in. It was just they dug for a building, they found a sarcophagus. Everybody did, so these objects are not unknown to people. They see them in places, in the ruins and the whatever, the columns, all that stuff. It's not unknown stuff. It's actually very much a part of their lives, which is what I was trying to get to. I was like, they're very comfortable with these things. They're comfortable with old stones because, Lebanon's just old stones, really. Different states of ruin. But there was that part. But what I would do is I'd stand in front of this sarcophagus with the garbage in it and kind of talk to them about it. And then we'd go inside, and I had a routine for how I would do it. So the way that I began is, I don't know, when I showed the website, there was these two bulls on the top of the column. I would walk up the first question was we'd walk there and I'd just say, look at that. If you could climb up, if you could literally climb up on that now, which direction would you sit in? And that broke everything down right away because people were like, just imagining touching this object and climbing up there. They were like, I'd look towards the door. I'd look left. I'd look right. I'd look left. And, and after a while, and then we passed another object and I said, if you could leave anything on that, what would you leave on it? And then they responded. By the end of those two questions, they had already broken something was broken, some idea that they were actually able to touch, able to leave their stuff, able to climb on the thing. And after that, then I would just go through the questions and people were pretty, yeah, it was astounding sometimes really how intimate and how softened they became.
Yeah, I'm actually have a second question then. I'm curious actually about sort of the role of the guard then. Do you feel he sort of played somewhat of a facilitating authority figure in that he's the guard of the museum with the gun, and then his invitation allowed them to then engage freely kind of, with you? I'm
Yeah,
just
I mean, they weren't,
curious
the
about
guard didn't
dynamic.
bring in all that many people, but I'll tell you what became quite funny is that the guards and all the people who worked in the museum, because the museum is a pretty quiet place, and most of the time it's like foreigners coming in.
Mm.
Everybody got super excited. So they were kind of bringing people. He got into it. He was very sweet about it. It wasn't actually some kind of, we were just laughing. The people who organized it were like, oh my God, he's so excited about it. He's bringing people. What are they going to think? He's walking around with a gun saying, hey, don't you want to come in? But I think what happened, we did this for several weeks and there were a lot of people who showed up. So it became something, where people wanted to bring people in. The guards they knew everybody, they knew the questions, they got very involved in it. And I think people started to feel like, oh, you mean other people are going to walk around and listen to what I'm saying? Like, is that, and so there was a kind of sense of camaraderie and sharedness. What I will say, and this is what because I've spent a lot of time, I was at one point married to a curator, so I've spent a lot of time in museums and stuff, and I know, and I'm very interested in what that is. We hired two famous actors for the actual audio guide. We hired two famous Lebanese actors to voice the voice of authority, a script that I wrote for them after the whole project. So after I had collected all of these voices, I kind of frameworked, I structured a little bit about each of the objects before the people started speaking. And both of them are comedians, and one is a comedian and the other one is this very famous actress, and they were quite involved. And we gave them this kind of, they play acted the voice of authority, which is an interesting thing. They were taking on this role, and then you had the voice of the people, but they were just all in there together. You know, it was kind of trying to break the the hierarchies. I don't know if that.
Yeah, no, that's really great. That helps answer my question, certainly.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And okay, we move now to Beijing. Hi, Christina. Hello, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Annabelle, that was such an amazing presentation, and your work really moved me. I mean, it's hard to have questions because I was so moved by it. To Raffaella's point, I could cry because my camera was off. Yeah, I'm very moved by your work. And I'm also right now personally working on a project to do with a workshop with community. And I'm looking at the concept of being a consumer citizen versus being a participant. And your work really brings participation to community, which I think is amazing. My question is around fortune. So you had said that you started in 2013, I think. Do you still do that? And I have so many questions around that. So I love that it's based on nonverbal communication. And I was wondering what the guidelines are for you. So how you generate these fortunes, and do you have certain guidelines that you have to respect in tone, or are they positive or that kind of thing? So like, what's your responsibility in that? And if it's changed over the years, and do you still do that?
I do still do it. There are certain times when it feels a little hard to do it. I would say during COVID, well, first of all, that we couldn't have interaction, but even a little bit after that, because people had so many fears, I didn't really feel, because there was, health and stuff involved. It's quite difficult, even though I don't write about any of that. What I do is basically the whole thing started with a completely other project, which was called Minwen Lawen, which means from where to where. So I did it when I did that project. And so what I would do is I write, you are coming from da 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 da, you are going to da 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 da, you are here. And the here has an X. And so that's the structure. It's always the structure. When I first started doing it, they were short sentences. So you are coming from da 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 da. And now they are a little longer because I kind of gotten carried away, but they're not that long. And when I started doing it, like I used to be a painter. I stopped painting in 2003 when we went into war in Iraq, and I made a piece called America where it's this massive piece that's all text. And after doing that, everything looked like language to me, literally still does. Like something kind of disintegrated for me. I would just look at a thing and I'd just see words. And I still kind of do. So when people put their hands out, I see language, and I will say something in silence and in repetition, because I usually do it for 3 to 4 hours at a time, and I don't speak and no one else speaks, because once you're silent, everybody's silent. And because of the ritual of it and whatever, something kind of happens and people start giving a lot of themselves. The other thing is, when people sit in this position, which I would bet, I mean, I don't know all of you, but I don't know how many of you have sat for 7 to 10 minutes in front of a stranger with your arms out, with your hands out flat on a table, staring at your own hands, waiting to see what you're going to get. People's hands start to sweat, people get freaked out, their shoulders shake. And I realized, I don't think I've ever sat in all this time that I've done it. I don't think I've ever looked at my own palms for 7 minutes. So I say that to say that that position of offering and giving, creates something in people. And I talk about the money part of it because I think it's very important. One, I think artists should get paid for their labor. So I'm getting paid for my labor. It's not that much, but I think it's extremely important. The other thing is I didn't ever want it to be a gift because there's a huge difference between a gift and a performance and the actual act of expecting something. I want people to expect something from me, and they do. Even if somebody pays you $10, they actually still think that you owe them something, which you do. And so there's something about that whole exchange that I find really fundamental. I don't know how I started this whole thing. It was kind of accidental, but it built itself very quickly into something, and I've never really changed it. I mean, I changed the paper, I changed the pen. Sometimes I used to dip with ink. Now I just write, There are a couple of people on this that I see who have several of mine because they've come to several different events. So, I don't know if when they read it, I mean, often people will wait and they'll want to ask me, and they ask me, what does this mean? For me, it's like you read into it whatever you want to read into it. Like I wrote into it whatever I wrote into it at the time. I also never look up at people's faces. So I very often don't even know if I've done who I've done. I try very hard not to also use fortune tellers use tells, like also like what you're wearing, how you're looking, whatever. But since I'm not really trying to tell you anything like that, I don't know what I tell you, honestly. It just kind of is there. I don't know if that answers what you
Yeah,
like.
yeah, very much. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Now I have to play timekeeper here. So I think we still have time for, I think, one more question from the living room, but perhaps we could now start talking about the last part and the participatory piece, because I think then it makes sense to have, we still have 20 more minutes, but then you can share the rules of the game and let's see. And then if we still have time, one more question,
we can do
otherwise
another
we
question.
wrap up.
Can you see me as well as the screen? Yes.
Yes,
So I'm making a piece every day for 365 days. I'm now on 115, and it just says one day, and it's this net. And so what I'm asking for anyone who would like to be involved in this, because there will be a sound piece that accompanies this when it is finally done, or if not accompanies it, is kind of, very often I make two works with the same words. So basically I'm asking anyone who would like to complete this sentence one day, da 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 da. And you can write it on the card and give it to Raffaella, or you can think about it and email it to me. You can also just write me an email and send it to me. I don't care. I don't want it to be a long kind of paragraph. It's generally, I'm looking for, you've heard the work, so you kind of get a feeling for how long what people generally do with the responses. But I think one day is interesting because temporally it can be the past or it can be the future. So you can do whatever you like with it. And if you don't write well in English and you'd like to write in Korean, we can translate it. Yeah. So, and what I do with people, because I think that this is an important thing, is when people trust me and people give me their language, I always send them, if they would like, a link to whatever sound work it is, so they have access to listen to it. Or I invite that and also invite them to wherever it's exhibited if they'd like to see it in real life. So if you do send me anything, I'll be voicing it, but it probably won't happen for a while. But I will definitely, if you send me your email, I'll definitely send you a notice when it's done.
And for those who are here, we can collect the sentence, the handwritten sentence in case. But I think also for those who are online, they can handwrite and then take a picture. Anyway, we can be very creative in sharing this sentence. But for those of you who are here, paper and pencil there, please participate in this because I think it's very okay. Any more, please? Yes, we have more questions from the living room.
Hello, Annabel, and thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Apart from all your meaningful work, you also have an amazing voice that is definitely your art medium that makes it a very also pleasant and personal experience to listen to your works and to watch them as well. And from what I've noticed, your works are with the community. They are on the global level and also on the country level sometimes. And since we're in the career, I was wondering what kind of work you see yourself doing here. What kind of projects you have in mind that you would like to realize here? Thank you so much.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Well, I came to Korea. I went to Jeju and then spent time in Seoul in August of last year with my partner, and we literally walked absolutely everywhere. So that was really interesting. Yeah. That's a big question. Yeah. I can't say right away, but I will say something before I started using microfiber paper. So I didn't show a lot of my works on paper. That's a big part of my work is not actually quite works on paper, but the use of paper and cutting words out. But before that, I used to write words, and in between using very like European style, watercolor paper and using this kind of microfiber paper, which is industrially made, I was using a lot of Japanese, I was using a lot of handmade papers from around the world. And I actually found it really interesting. For me, it was kind of a way of dealing, of thinking about like the process, because I'm interested in the way that paper, even though that's not so true anymore, paper kind of is where we put the writing and the chronicling and the history of ourselves, at least conceptually, not so much anymore. But like I think there's something really interesting about all these different papers from all these different places and how they interact with the stories that are being told on them or the language that's being put on them. So I think probably I would be interested in maybe trying to think about materiality, the difference of materials, because I am very interested in my, in hands and the work of hands. I spend sometimes 10, 12, 18 hours when I'm working for a show cutting through paper and tearing little bits and putting them back together with document repair tape, which is something that I use a lot. So yeah, that's what I could think of right now. But yeah.
Thank you. Okay, last question. And then we wrap up.
Thank you, Annabel. Yeah, such an inspiring talk. Yeah, the diversity of your work is incredible. I was just wondering if you go into your projects with an expectation of what the outcome or the impact will be, and if you do, which project has surprised you the most?
I don't actually, and I really love that question. I jokingly actually said my son asked me yesterday, he was interviewing me. He said, "Tell me a secret. Tell me something some people don't know." And I, and I literally said to him, and this is last night, I said, you know, I think I trip into everything I do. And I suppose my shame or my whatever is that I don't know whether I've ever taken the time to make something purely intentionally. And I say that as somebody who has a lot of constraints on what I will and won't do. And my work is entirely created by the boundaries that I set up for myself. Very, very simple ones very often, but they're very rigid. You know, as you can tell, you know, the repetition of things, but it's such a fantastic question because like what I actually, you know, what I think my work does have very different quality to it and you know, I never seem to be able to just come back to making the same thing again and again. I'm always kind of feeling like I trip into something else. But what I actually think does unite the work is that it allows for what happens next, even within the constraints. And I think that that's, you know, for me, always surprising, like always surprising and, you know, scary because I put a lot of time. I mean, I wrote X a million times. The like the letter X a million times, a piece I didn't show here, on document repair tape, and then adhered it to plastic bags. And you know, I didn't know what the hell that would be. It's just that I decided I'm going to write X a million times. So I think, yeah, I don't know. I love your question. It's a great question. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm always surprised.
Thank you. I'm always surprised. Perfect. And for this, I love it. Thank you very much. I think I can say class dismissed now. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Yeah, thank you so much, Raffaella.
Thank you very much. This was awesome. Stay with me 1 more minute.